Hi everybody, Adam Steele from Hop Pole Studios here, and today we're going to be doing a tutorial about the very basics of how to use Reaper, the DAW, Digital Audio Workstation. Basically how to get sound coming through, making sure that your recording's working properly, how to make sure that you're hearing what you're supposed to be hearing, so that you can get up and running, recording your vocals, recording your guitars, drums, whatever it is you want to record. We're going to do it right from the very beginning. We have done a tutorial on this before, which you can find on YouTube that's got many thousands of views, but originally that was supposed to be kind of a one-off thing. It was done on a webcam, so this time we're going to do it properly in the studio, and I'm going to make some notes and make sure that everything is crystal clear as possible. So without further ado, on we go. Okay, so we're going to talk about setting up Reaper right from the very beginning. So apologies in advance if any of this feels a little bit like it's condescending or anything like that. A lot of people watching this video, especially the very start of this video, will have no experience of any production equipment or any sort of production methods at all. So I'm going to go through this step by step. Very soon though, probably within the first 10 minutes, we'll be past the basic setup and into how to actually use Reaper as a digital audio workstation. First things first, if I was going to try and show you how to use Reaper on some crazy machine like this thing behind me with all the thousands of pounds of gear and all that kind of stuff hanging off it, that would be a really complicated way to do it. What I'm going to do today is this setup right in front of me. This is a Lenovo ThinkPad, and it's several years old now. I only got this week specifically for videos like this because it's a fairly sturdy machine. It's never had any audio production software on it at all. It's got a completely new install of Windows, although you can use Reaper in the very same way that we're about to do here on macOS and even on Raspberry Pis now. And so we're going to talk about what you really need as the absolute minimum for music production. So what do you need? You need a machine, a computer to work with, whether it be a Windows laptop, a MacBook, iMac, even a Raspberry Pi. You're really going to need some kind of audio interface. Today we're using the Audient Sono, which is a fantastic interface that I have on loan from Audient. Usually for smaller projects I would use an ID4, which is their little one microphone input USB powered box. But today this is what I have on hand, so we're using the Sono. Great interface, a bit more expensive than I would use as an absolute beginner, but it's from the same family as the ID4, the ID14, which are really good interfaces. So, the principles and practices are exactly the same. And last but not least, you're going to need something to listen to what you're doing with, which is either going to be headphones or studio monitors. I'm going to talk about plugging in both of those things. So the first thing we're going to want to do is to get Reaper installed on our machine. So I'm going to show you the screen of the laptop. Nothing has been installed on here apart from basic things like Chrome. So the first thing we're going to do is open our web browser, whichever one you prefer. Like I said, I'm using Chrome here. And we're going to go to Reaper.fm. That's the Reaper website. If you're downloading from anywhere else, I wouldn't trust it. Could be some sort of dodgy software packed in with it. Reaper.fm is the official website. And right at the top here, no messing about, download Reaper. The very latest version as of making this video is 5.978. So I really suspect that Reaper 6 is around the corner, and I'll probably make a video on that as well. So you'll be choosing between Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux. Today I'm on Windows. This is 64-bit Windows, as are most modern versions of Windows. Same for OS X. If you can, I highly recommend downloading the 64-bit version of whichever one of these you can. If that won't run on your system because your system's 32-bit, then go back, get the 32-bit version. They work identically, except that as you start to get to bigger productions, the 64-bit one has more memory available to it, which means that more samples and that kind of thing can be loaded up. And also, a lot of plugin developers now for external plugins aren't making 32-bit versions anymore because 32-bit operating systems are pretty much a yesterday thing, and it's a lot of work to concentrate on. So, we've downloaded it. We'll get this installed. It's a simple enough process. We open it up. Same on OS X. Yes, I agree. Yes. All the necessary tick boxes. We want to keep everything ticked. Doesn't take long at all. Completed. Run now. No. Because there is another step we have to do. And that is the audio interface that I was talking about. The next thing that we'll have to do, pretty much no matter what interface you have, it's highly recommended, if not absolutely essential, that you go to the manufacturer's website for the interface and get the latest drivers for that. Some audio interfaces, a lot of people will say, oh, well, I can plug it in and it just works. I highly recommend you don't do that, because the drivers that whoever has made this interface has made for it are designed to work the best they can possibly work. And in audio production, it's a very important thing to have things running as efficiently as possible with all the features available to you, because that will then make sure that it's working properly with minimum latency, which is a whole thing that we've got to talk about, and with the least amount of problems, pops and clicks and crackles and features missing, that kind of thing. So, for Audient, who make this interface, we're going to audient.com. If yours is made by, Focusrite, or that'd be focusrite.com, or Antelope, Universal Audio, whoever they are, find their official website. So we're going to go to the support page for the Sono, and somewhere down here, I can see on the links at the top, I saw downloads then, which means if I find that somewhere on this page, there we are, downloads, just a little further down the page. So further down on this downloads page, we have our Mac OS installer, our Windows installer, which of course in this case we want the Windows one. That's not going to take very long to download at all for us. That depends entirely on your internet speed, so make sure if you're in an area with poor internet that you get your drivers ahead of time so you're not wasting time when you want to be producing music. Okay, so that downloaded and now I'm getting it installed. Yes, next, I agree. It's going to install some extra stuff, which if we're using the Sono to its full capacity will be really useful, but today they're largely irrelevant for the purposes of this video. By the way, while this is installing, you really can run Reaper on any old hunk-of-junk computer. Pretty much back to like Windows XP. The newer the computer is, the more tracks it will handle efficiently, the more processing you can do. But I did actually do a video for fun a couple of years back of running Reaper 4 on a very old iMac, like the really old kind of screen on a swivel things, and it was running quite fine on that. Okay, so that's done. Finish. And close our browser. We are done. So now that our drivers are installed, next thing to do is plug in our interface, which is currently not plugged in. This one's a USB one, but if yours is Firewire or anything like that that's slightly different, now is the time to plug that in. And make sure it's turned on. So that's the first thing we're going to do is double click the Reaper icon and wait for it to give us the nice pretty load screen, while it takes a little longer than it would usually because this is the very first time it's ever been run on this machine. And of course it says you have not yet selected an audio device. Would you like to select one now? Yes. So it comes up with this screen, which looks terrifying, but don't be too worried. Your first choice is audio system right at the top, and there are all these different choices. On Mac OS I would be using Core Audio, but on Windows I want to be using one called ACO. ACO is the system that the guys who make Cubase made, Steinberg, which enables computers to use stuff very, very quickly and not use too much processing power doing it, which means that the interface takes over a lot of that work. Next thing is we choose the ACO driver. In this case, having literally only installed one, we're choosing the Audient USB audio driver. If you had used in the past different interfaces from different manufacturers. They would be in this drop-down list here, and you just have to choose the appropriate one. Then we've got enable inputs. We choose the first one as number 1, and we'll choose the last one as the very last one. You can choose a custom range. I'm not entirely sure why you would, but the opportunity is there. And the same with the output range, which I'm going to use all of them, 1 to 4 and input 1 to 12. While we're here, we're going to talk about sample rate briefly, because there's a tick box here to request a sample rate. I'm not going to go into huge depth about sample rate because there are videos talking about this, including one from myself, that talk about this for a long amount of time and a lot of depth. All I'm going to say is, if you choose 44100, which is 44.1 kilohertz, that's generally the sample rate that I think you should be working at if you're intending to work for CDs as your output format. And 48,000, which is 48 kilohertz, which is the sample rate that I think you should be working at if you're looking at producing stuff for DVDs and film or YouTube, because of video production, the way that works. Arguably, if you're working with Spotify and iTunes, the iTunes white paper for mastering says that you should be using the highest sample rate possible, which could be 96 kilohertz. For me, that's a bit overkill, but I like working at 48,000, and I've ticked the box request sample rate, which says to your interface, hey, can we please work at this sample rate? Is that okay? The rest of these aren't really important to us right now, but if we hit OK, then it's going to come up telling us, hi, this is Reaper. Reaper is not free. You get a 60-day trial. At the end of that 60-day trial, it does keep working indefinitely, so a lot of people do keep using it, although really you should be paying for what you use. But it does mean that you can use it wherever you like. So I hit still evaluating. For me, I have a copy of the Reaper license on the machine behind me and a separate Reaper license on my main laptop. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to get another one because this is just showing you guys around the software. Nothing is blocked off or walled off in the software because it's a trial. Everything is available to you, so you can do full production even in an evaluation version of Reaper. Apologies everyone, I'm going to interrupt myself here very briefly, just to mention Distrokid. We're not being paid to promote Distrokid in this video, but if your music is now ready to release, or if you're getting to that point, then you need to use some kind of service to get it onto iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, all these kind of streaming services. And Distrokid is a great platform to do that from. For a single user, they charge $19.99 for a year, and you can even get a few % off that if you use our link in the description. And from that, you can then release as much of your own material as you like all year round. And so if you want to do one song, cool. If you want to do 10 albums, also cool. They can also sort you out with licenses for cover songs. So if you want to do cover songs, it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg like it used to do. They can do pretty cool things like if somebody else covers your song on YouTube, they can make sure the money's collected and comes to you. Then there's also things like if you've got Shazam or Siri that can actually listen to what a music piece is now, you can have them, for a little extra, have that so that that comes up. So someone says, hey Siri, what's that song? And it goes, hey, it's that song by you. So I think that's pretty neat. And it's all relatively easy to do. If you click that link in the description below as well, it does help us out a little bit. So for every time that you get money off and you sign up to Distrokid, we get some help as well. Thanks, and let's get back to the tutorial. Sorry for interrupting, I know it's a pain. Off we go. So I'm going to make this full screen, and it says at the top right, audio device closed. The first thing I'm going to do is on this timeline here, in this big blank section of the screen top right, I'm just going to click the left mouse button somewhere, and I'm going to hit the spacebar, which is play. There we go, and what that did is that woke up the audio interface. It asked, hey, can we work at 48 kilohertz? And when I hit play, that started moving. And on the top right, importantly, we can now see 48 kilohertz, which is what we asked for, 24-bit wave, which is the default that Reaper records at, which for me is perfect. And then it says the number of samples, which is to do with latency, And then the number of milliseconds there, 15 and 12, is how long it's taking to get audio in, and then how long it's taking for audio to come back out. Latency is important because if you're working on a mix, say, and you're not recording anything, you can just hit play, and a bit of latency means that the interface and the computer and every part of this that's involved has a little bit of time to scramble everything together and then present whatever part of the song to you when you hit play. The problem with high latency is that if I was recording something and listening back to that in real time, then if I was to be in front of a microphone and let's say I clapped, the latency is the time it takes for that clap to be picked up by the microphone and then turned into something by the interface and then turned into something by Reaper, come back out of the interface into the headphones or out of the monitors. And if that's too long, it's really quite upsetting and disturbing and can put you off playing. So if I was to go clap with a high latency, it would actually sound like g, k, g, k. And if I can get the latency really low, then it comes out of the headphones seemingly at the same time I'm doing it. There's always a tiny, tiny bit of delay. Even with like Pro Tools HD systems and that kind of thing, there is some latency. But if it's really, really, really low, the human brain doesn't pick up on it and it doesn't matter. Which means that if you're working with a very low number of samples of latency, which is the buffer of how much the computer and the interface have in terms of time to scramble together and make sure everything's right, then it can make the difference between something that's recordable and something that's very, very difficult. By the same token, if you are just mixing and your computer's struggling at a low latency because it's trying to scramble to get all this audio together, if you're not recording, you can then make that latency a little bigger, give it a bigger buffer, a bit more room to breathe. That can help in quite a lot of circumstances. So what we're going to do now is we're going to adjust the latency because as far as I'm concerned, 512 samples is too much for me because that's, as we can count here, 27 milliseconds in total by adding those two numbers together. That's too much. To me, that's a noticeable kicker, which, especially if I'm playing guitar, can really mess with my head. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this on the top right, and that's a shortcut to bring us back to this menu that we saw before. Now there's a button that we didn't press earlier on that is ACO configuration. Now for some devices this brings up a big menu, for some of them it doesn't, and as I've just noticed for the Sono, that didn't bring it up, which is annoying, but we have to be in this menu to release the audio interface so that we can tweak and mess around with things. It's kind of the equivalent of turning off a car engine before a mechanic goes underneath and starts working on it. It's kind of a safety thing. It makes sure that you don't get horrible noises coming out of the speakers or the headphones. And in that regard, it makes things easier to work with. So in the start menu, there is a little S. And that little S is for Sono, that's the Audion driver. This could be different depending on what manufacturer you're working with. But if we right click on that, we have options like set ACO buffer size, set sample rate, which we've already requested, set clock source, which is only important if you're using more than one digital piece of equipment. So for today, we're going to breeze past that and maybe talk about it another time. So set ACO buffer size is the important thing for us. And I'm going to try 128 samples. So I clicked 128 and then I'm going to hit OK in our Reaper menu. And there we go. That's changed now to 128 samples up here. 5.1 and 4.5 milliseconds latency. That's still a little more than I would like, but in terms of working with USB interfaces, that's really quite reasonable. To get much lower than that, you're starting to look at Firewire interfaces, which aren't really made anymore, Thunderbolt interfaces, or PCI Express, which is basically a card that slots straight into a computer, which is what I'm using behind me with an RME RAID-AT card. So that's something for another day. So let's look at the Reaper window. So the top half here is the tracking window. If I hit plus and minus, I can zoom in and out and you can see the numbers on the timeline getting bigger and smaller. And the bottom half is the mix window. So I'm going to hide the mix window for a minute. and we're going to come back to that. So we can see more on screen without the mix window. So that means that we can work with a nice peace of mind and a clear head. So we have a digital audio workstation ready to go. What are we going to do with it? First thing that you're probably going to want to do is get some sort of sound out of it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a track. And then we're going to play something on that track that was pre-recorded, whether it's an MP3 of One Direction or something that I've previously recorded or whatever it is, which means that then we're ready to go. Let's say that you're using a karaoke track that you want to sing to, that's then ready. Or if you're just using this to test out the system, which is what we're going to do now, then you've got something to work with. So this big dark section on the left, what I want to do is double click in here. And a track came up. It's that simple. There are other ways to do it, like if I was to right click here, there's insert new track or the shortcut Control T. But it's a nice shortcut here that really saves me a lot of time, is that I can just keep clicking like a madman. And if I just click, more and more and more tracks turn up. I'm going to hit undo, which is Control and Z a few times to get rid of those. And just for illustration purposes, I'm going to make this one track that we have really big by getting the bottom of that track, and the mouse changes to that up and down, and I'm just going to drag that down to make this bigger so we can see what the flipping heck is going on. Before we go any further, I'm going to do something that you should always do with every project. You can open Reaper and you can just start working straight away, which is great, but you do run the risk, if you just go straight away, of losing things if the computer sets on fire or somebody throws it across a room. For whatever reason the computer crashes. I find that Reaper's really quite stable, but bad things happen, so make sure you save your work before anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to File and Save Project. So by default you're in Documents and Reaper Media. I actually have a separate hard drive that I save stuff to, but that's my way of working. And let's just call this Tutorial Audio. And there are little tick boxes, so I can create a subdirectory for the project, which I'm going to tick, which means that it's going to make a little folder for that, and then any work that we do, any audio that we record, anything like that will go in that folder. And there are little options, copy all media into project directory or move all media. So if you've already started working on a project and gone, oops, I really should save this, then by ticking one of these boxes, you can then make sure that when you save the folder, save the project somewhere else, anything you've already recorded is put into that relevant folder, so you're not going to then lose it later on. Very handy. So we're going to hit save, and then our project is done. So we're going to have a track ready, and as you can see there, I accidentally moved the left mouse cursor and selected a region, which we're going to come back to later on. That's not necessarily the most important thing right now, but what is important is if we insert a media file. So we're going to go to the insert menu at the top and hit media file. The shortcut for that, if you're already on the right track, is literally the button on your keyboard that says insert. So that brings up the menu import file into project. So I've just downloaded a sample called Sample Audio. Not entirely sure what this is, but I'm playing it and no sound is coming out. We can see the meters moving on this channel, but we can't hear anything. What's happening? Well, something that I really must explain at this point is that when you're using an audio interface, all the sound will come out of and go into that interface. So anything like the sounds coming out of your laptop or your desktop or any speakers or headphones plugged into that machine will not be making this noise because all the sound is being sent to the interface, which means that at this point I have to either plug in headphones or the monitors. And so I've plugged the two monitor outputs on the back of the Sono. What I would usually plug straight into speaker monitors and make sure the volume's up at a reasonable level. Today I've got plugged in to the system behind me so that you guys can hear it, but generally that is what I would do, is be plugging the monitor outputs straight into monitors, and this is what we get. So it sounds pretty horrible, but that is just white noise as a test tone, and that means that I know that's going to work. So that's step one. If I was to replace that with anything like an MP3, which I use WAV files where you can, but you know, or you can get any other kind of sound in here that will just play out of the master outputs, which by default are set to output 1 and 2, which is the speaker outputs and headphone outputs on this box, and then you make sure that that's all wired up appropriately depending on what interface you're using. That's step one done. Something I should probably mention at this point is that if this sound is coming out too loud for you, you might want to use the volume control on your interface, you might want to use the volume control on your monitors, but you also might want to control the volume from here. And if you look at where this file name is for the track name, that's automatically named itself based on the file that I've put in there. But if I was to call that track of stuff, that is then renamed. There's no file name limit or anything like there is in some programs. And next to it is the volume, which if you hover over it says 0 dB, and then I can go from that downwards. So I could go all the way down to -infinity, which is nothing, and then bring it slowly up. Hit play so I can hear it. Cool, so there's plenty to be changing, and then just to the right of that is the pan knob, so I can make it go on the left. Or the right, respectively, which is how you get stereo panning of left and right for different signals and get a big stereo image. Another thing that's really important for me at this point is being able to just replay a certain section over and over and over. So let's say that we've got a little section here where I dragged the left mouse and ended up selecting a little bit, and then I can click on the timeline just above that, which is where all these numbers are. That determines where we're playing from, but then the white bit is the selection. If I hit the button at the bottom, there's stop, play, pause, record, and then repeat. If I click that or use the R key, when it gets to this little white section, it will go round and round and round it. I find that's quite useful if you're working on a song and you just want to listen to the same section over and over and over again. It can be accidental, be careful, if you just select a tiny little bit like this and then end up stuck in a loop. That's usually what's happening if you've got a DAW and it's going ding 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 ding. It's usually that you've got a tiny little selection on loop. So you can either make the selection bigger by just drawing a bigger box anywhere on this track screen, including at the top, at the bottom, anywhere, or you should be able to just right click, remove selection, or use the escape key and that will get rid of that, or hit R to take off loop. One quick thing to note here is this particular file that I've got, if I decide that I don't need it, I don't like it, I can hit the delete key, off it goes, done. If that was a mistake, I can hit Control and Z or Apple and Z to undo that, and that's back. Okay, so I've replaced the white noise with a track called Dark Tranquility that I got off YouTube. I'll put a reference just here for who made it. But now let's say I want to record something with that. So it could be a vocal, it could be a guitar part. In this case, I got the old ironing board bass out, which I thought was kind of funny. And I'm going to plug this right in. My interface here has a DI port. If you're recording, then you're going to have to look into what it is that you want to record, whether you're using microphones or whether you're using DI injection, that kind of thing, because how to record audio is a conversation for another day. Let's say you've already decided what gear you're using for guitar or whatever, you've got the microphone in place, or you're recording like this. So if I was to plug in to the DI track and start playing, nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is that even though we've plugged in here, we've not told Reaper what to do. We've not given it any instructions as to what our intentions are. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is open up a new track. Now that is a little bit big for this screen. I'm going to just use Control and I'm going to use a little plus and minus in the corner to make the screen's tracks bigger and smaller. If I was using a proper mouse, and I highly recommend getting a mouse for using Reaper, I could use the mouse wheel to make everything bigger and smaller much more quickly than that. So now we've got a track, and the first thing that we want to do with this new track is name it. I'm going to name this bass, which, track naming really helps down the line. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to hit record, and still very little will happen. So I've plugged this into the relative channel. I'm playing away. I can now see the meters moving, but I can't hear anything. So that's the next stage. Why is that? So I can't hear anything because monitoring is not enabled on that channel. Monitoring is getting the sound through the interface, back through Reaper, and then back to you, whether it's on the headphones or on the monitors. And that is this little icon here, which is a speaker icon. If you hover over it, it says record monitoring off. Give it a click, record monitoring is on, and now if I play, when the meter moves, we should hear it. From here, if we go to a section of the track, we can record stuff now. So if I hit play from the start of this song, and hit stop again, that's not recorded anything. And why not? Simply, just because we have a track armed for recording doesn't mean it's actually going to record. It's a safety feature. So what we have to do is actually hit the record button, which is the big red one down the bottom, or Control and R, which is a shortcut I prefer to use because I feel it's quite definite, it's quite definitive and safe. But in this case, I'll hit record. Okay, so when I hit stop, it comes up saying files recorded. Would you like to save them? Would you like to delete them? I personally change this behavior when I'm doing it personally. It says prompt to save on stop or on punch out and play. I untick on stop so that it saves automatically, and I hit save all. For me, that means that every time I record and hit stop, the files are automatically kept and I'm not having to go through that menu every time. Now, one thing that you may notice, well, if I hit play, we will hear that bass part now. If I want to only hear that, that's where the M and S buttons come in. The M for mute will mute a track and you can see it go dark. S will solo a track and all the other tracks go dark and go silent so that only the ones you've hit solo on are what you're going to hear. So if I hit solo on this and hit play, now, you may have noticed that the bass that I was playing was slightly out of tune there. I certainly noticed it. That's something I'm going to come back to in a minute because I can use effects here to bring up something like a tuner. And I don't mean auto-tune or anything like that because that's also an option if you buy that separately. I mean actually bringing up like a guitar tuner so you don't have to pay for an extra one. You know, it's inbuilt into Reaper, you may as well use it. So the next thing I'm going to talk about here is the mix window, because now we have more than one track going, the mix window will become relevant. If we go to View, Mixer, we suddenly see right down the bottom where there was nothing before apart from the master track, there are now 2 tracks. The way that this works is the edit window, the bit up top, all the tracks that you make, they work from the top down. They all play concurrently, but the way it works is kind of going down. Equivalent, this is the mix window, and this goes left to right with exactly the same tracks, just displayed going the opposite way. And if I was to make loads and loads and loads of tracks just by double clicking in this blank space, is another nice little shortcut. If I then use the bit of the screen just at the top of it where I can change, just under this bar with the numbers, I can change how big and small the areas are. This will start to look a lot more like an analog mixing desk, because you'll see all the faders going left to right, all with the different names here, a few buttons, and then here are two very important parts, the inserts and the sends. And this is where effects come in. So I have my bass track ready to record with here. If I play, we can see it going. It's out of tune. I could get a pedal tuner or a clip-on tuner, but instead I'm showing you a feature of Reaper, which is that it has this inbuilt. Where it says track insert effects in this top part here, this is where we can add effects. There's more than one way to get here. You can also click the effects button down here. I like this way where I can just click in an empty block and it gives me a big list of every plugin that we have. And you can whittle them down into VSTs, their own format, which is JS. I can make this window a bit bigger so we can see more. There are different categories, so if you know exactly what you're looking for, you can whittle it down there. Or there's a bit at the bottom that says filter, where if you know exactly what the plugin you're looking for is called, you can start typing that out and it will slim the list down to only things with that piece of the name in. So you can very quickly, even with thousands of plugins, find exactly what you want if you know what it's called. I use this day in, day out. It saves me hours of time. A lot of other DAW programs, you're looking under this category for that category for this. And so here I can just go, the plugin I'm looking for is a tuner called Retune. Re for Reaper, tune. So if I go R-E-A, I'm already in the JS category. So let's go back to all plugins. Re, T-U, and there's only one result, Retune. So if I double click that, that'll come up as a tuner. It's flicking the G10 at me. I can make this bigger, but if I play a note, I can then tune up. And yes, I know this instrument has far too many strings. That's a conversation for another time. I do love it. This 7-string bass, yes, that's a thing. If you're tuning a bass, by the way, you can change Retune's window size to be bigger to allow for lower notes. There we go. Right, so that's now in tune, more or less, but that was a fancy insert effect that didn't actually change the sound. Let's right click on that and go to delete effects. How about something that does change the sound? So let's get rid of that and look at our big list. So we've got loads and loads and loads of things that Reaper can do. And where it says VST, if you purchase or get hold of free or paid VST plugins, they all come up here, which is to say custom third-party plugins. I use loads. I use the Slate Everything bundle. I use a lot of Wave stuff. I use Isotope's Ozone. I use SonarWorks as a VST, which corrects everything. I use loads and loads and loads of those, but Reaper is kind of the heart of what I'm doing that hosts all of these VSTs. So let's do something a little bit crazy. Let's compress the life out of this using Recomp, which is Reaper's own compressor. If I double click on that and play, nothing's going to happen because everything's set to be fairly neutral. If I go to a preset, let's say Spanky Bass. That's still not doing anything because the threshold here isn't doing much, but if I bring that threshold down, we should get... You can see those levels really going and you should be able to hear the bass kind of pumping. That's the kind of thing we're looking for with separate plugins. So we can affect things, or we can use something a bit more run-of-the-mill. If I put an EQ in here instead, and I use Reaper's Re-EQ all the time, make this a little bit bigger so we can see what's going on. Let's say I want more low end. I can drag this up to be more low end. Let's say I want less of that honky high end. I can find it. I can use a shelf to really remove all the top end and make this proper dubby. So there are so many possibilities just with an EQ and a compressor, but then any separate plugins that you get, there are delays, there are reverbs, there are all sorts of things which are covered in separate tutorials, so I'll not go too much deeper into that. Something that we can do, I'm going to make a track and I'm going to call it The Reverb. This is a good example that I'm going to use of how to use a send, because the insert that I used there, what happens with inserts is that you've got a sound and that one channel, all of the sound from that channel goes through every insert effect completely, one by one until it's done with them. They are inserted into the signal path. So it was going to go from the bass to Reaper. Now it goes from the bass to those effects and then out. Sends mean that you're sending sound out to a separate track. And what you tend to do with this is something like if you've got a delay or a reverb, you might want those to be separate so that instead of having 20 or 30 channels in a mix and trying to put reverb on each separate one, you can have one reverb that's on a separate track and just send little bits of, say, each separate drum, each separate bass, guitar, keyboard, whatever it is, just little bits to that separate channel. That way, not only is it better in terms of using the processor, but it's also better in terms of your mind, because if you want to change something about that reverb, all you have to do is go into that one reverb and change one thing once. So, what you'd want to do is this track, The Reverb. Let's put something in called Reverbate. It's, let's use a preset. Send wide. That sounds cool. There is a different reverb in here, but Reverbate is really simple to use, and so that's what we're going to do. Oh, so we're going to remove the dry signal so that the reverb, is only making reverb and not carrying any of the original signal. That's what the dry is. And then we're going to use these sends. So if I click in where it says track sends, it'll bring me up the routing menu. Now the routing menu has all the stuff we've already seen in terms of the volume and the pan and that kind of thing that we saw, where we've got the pan here and the big fader for the volume. But under sends, we can add a new send, and it tells us the track names here. So we're sending this to The Reverb, and it comes up now as an extra send here, with all the volume and pan that's associated just with that. So that's currently going out full volume, and what's going to happen, I'm sure, is if I play this, it's going to sound really echoey. Now what we can do is we can change the amount of the bass that we're sending to the reverb by either sliding this slider up and down, or you can see behind the routing window, there's a little thing here that says going to the reverb and a little knob. The little knob just says this is how much, and you can change more or less. So with loads, that happens, and we end up with something like a monster out of Mass Effect or something like that. Or lower down, we can just have a little. And doing this is how you get a really nice reverb on vocals, but maybe you want more reverb on the backing vocals, less reverb on a certain feature vocal. Now you can just have one reverb channel and use the sends like we've just shown you to send a bit of this one, more for this one, less for that one. And you can even, using something we'll talk about later, using automation, change the amounts during the song. And that's where automation really makes life easy. But then also the sends are what makes life easy as well. I'm quickly going to just hide the mix window again so we can see more of this screen because there's a lot going on. Something I'm quickly going to mention is if you can get 2 screens for your computer, what you can do if this is really cluttering things up, then where it says the word mixer down here, this is the Docker. And what you can do if I right click on it is where it says dock mixer in Docker, I can untick that and now the mixer is free. It's separate, which means that if I just make that as big or small as I want, that can go somewhere else on the screen or on the next screen. If you've got 2 screens or 3 screens like you see behind me, you'll see over my shoulder that this screen up here has the mix window on, and the big one right down there is the one that's got the edit window on it. And then I like to have things like effects on the other screen, which is currently capturing this, so that's kind of by the by. So I'm going to hide that again now, because it's in our way. And that's why I tend to have it on another screen, so it's not in the way. You can see here that there's the track, the reverb, because like we said, it's just represented top to bottom instead of left to right. You could record audio onto that same channel that the reverb is on. I personally wouldn't, maybe that's a bit crazy, but you can. Something that's really important about Reaper is, unlike other workstations, it doesn't have audio tracks, instrument tracks, aux tracks, this kind of track, that kind of track. It just has tracks. And that means that you can send audio from one track to another, like you can on Analog Desk, simple. You can even send MIDI from one track to another, dead simple, same way. It doesn't care if the audio is mono, doesn't care if it's stereo. If it's mono, it just plays it out of both speakers. If it's stereo, great. You can even have multi-channel going, you can have surround sound if you set up a channel. There's a button where you can see where it says root. If I click that, it says track channels 2. That could be 4, 6, 8, however many you want. You then have to find a way to route those out through different speakers, but that's another conversation for another day. But let's say we want to make a MIDI track. And a MIDI track, I'm just going to unarm the record on the bass and put this down because it's heavy, really heavy. So I've called this track, which I'm going to put MIDI on, Le MIDI. Actually, you know what? I'm going to get a MIDI keyboard from behind me right now and we're going to plug that in. Do a practical demonstration. Okay, so I've got this monster plugged in next to me. This is an M-Audio USB MIDI keyboard. If you've got a keyboard that's got MIDI in and out but doesn't have a USB specifically for that, you can get USB MIDI boxes that will translate from MIDI to USB. I've got a couple dotted around, but they're kind of out of sight right now. This is a big one that Mo2 make. I've also got a little M-Audio one around that's got 2 channels in, 2 channels out. This is a 5-channel one. But it's a bit overkill for what I need. If you're a synth guy, this might be more what you need. Okay, so this M-Audio keyboard is now plugged in. It's not going to do much to begin with because we again have to tell Reaper that it exists and that we want to use it. Because if you've got other programs running, like, I don't know, Reason or something like that, you might want to not have Reaper involved with them at all and let the MIDI go to that other program. It's quite common. So we have to go to our Options menu, and right at the bottom of Options is Preferences, which is where a lot of the stuff in the back end is. And you'll have seen this window earlier on. This is the Audio Device menu. This is kind of our default. Just below that is MIDI Devices. Now, if you've used a MIDI box, you'll have to connect the MIDI cables to the ins and outs of your keyboard, that kind of thing. But here, our M-Audio key station has come up. So, if our key station made noise, which it doesn't, we could set the MIDI output so that we could send MIDI to it. I've got a Yamaha DX7 in the background, which I could use. I could send MIDI audio to it, and it would kind of play itself like those old kind of wind-up organs from the Wild West. That can be quite useful if you're running kind of a hybrid analog setup where you want the synths to actually kind of play in real time and you want to change the notes, but not have to edit it a different way. We're going to leave that alone today, but the MIDI input It's got two of them, and we want the first one. It just so happens that this key station for some reason has got two. And if we right click where it says mode disabled, we can enable input, and we can also enable input for control messages, which you don't have to do, but this keyboard has stop, play and record buttons on, which means that we can save ourselves a nice bit of time if we're recording near the keyboard and we don't want to have to run back to actually press buttons on the computer. So we need to hit apply. I usually hit reset all MIDI devices, which is here, and hit OK. So recording le MIDI is exactly the same as recording an audio channel in Reaper. So we've armed our track by hitting record on it, which now says record armed and is glowing red. We need to change our input. So if we go to the input drop down, originally our input was mono. It was that bass, which happened to be channel 1. If we had wanted it to be anything else, we would have chosen that here. Or stereo, you would have chosen, if say, I don't know, you're using stereo overheads on one channel, that's all here as well. But then the next one down is input MIDI. So you're just choosing what's going in. And now that we've enabled that key station 88, it comes up here, and then it gives us an option of which channel to use. You can get really clever with MIDI and use different channels for different tracks. I personally don't bother, I just go with using all channels because nothing interferes with this Reaper track that we've made unless we specifically tell it to, which can get confusing, so I try and keep them all separate. Now, if I start hitting keys, you can see a red line that's coming up, and the harder I hit the keys, the bigger the red line. But there's no sound. If I hit the monitor button, there's still no sound. Why is that? The reason that there's still no sound is because MIDI is not a sound in and of itself. MIDI is just an instruction that says, play this note at this volume and then stop. There's a little more to it, but it's just information. So what we have to do is we have to have some sort of plug-in virtual instrument that is being told what to do. Now, Reaper does come with some very, very basic ones. Quite often you'll find yourself buying, if you're into doing this kind of thing, something like Contact, the Native Instruments Complete Set, Arturia's V Collection. You'll find yourself getting hold of virtual synths. Quite a lot of them are free, quite a lot of them are not free. Generally speaking, the ones you pay for are better. But let's just get something going right now. So where this little effects button is, let's bring that up. Clear our filter from when we were searching for reverb earlier, and we can see if we go to all plugins, VSTi is what we're looking for. And right now, let's just use Resynth. So Resynth is a very, very basic synthesizer that's come up, and you can see we've got our monitoring enabled, we've got the right keyboard enabled. If I start hitting keys, so every time I hit a key, something happens, and we can change things like the release, which will make this go on longer. And we can change the waveform. So now we can record that in, and if we go back to where we were in our track so we can see a few things, I'm going to move this Le MIDI track. I'm literally just going to grab it on the left with a mouse click, and I'm going to drag it a little further up. And I can just let go, and it'll move. This means that as we go, if we've got any tracks like the reverb where we don't really need to see the track, it will just end up down at the bottom. And that's how I like to work, is kind of drums, bass, guitars, keyboards, vocals, effects right at the end, because I only want to see them every now and again just to check things and change things. So the MIDI, if I just go back to the start and hit record, because that's armed, okay, so the horrible farty bass aside, which I should probably mute because that's really getting in the way, you can see here now on this channel, that's not audio. That is MIDI notes represented going left to right, and you can actually see where I was tapping it. You can see the lower, middle, and upper octaves of what I was doing there, so you can actually see high and low going on MIDI. If you don't have a MIDI keyboard like I've got, that's fine. What you can do is if I go to View and Virtual MIDI Keyboard, I can actually have a MIDI keyboard on screen, which I can click with the mouse. And then I can change the input for the MIDI for that track from Keystation 88 to Virtual MIDI Keyboard. So then, and I can even use the keys as denoted in this tiny little writing. And then I can use the arrow keys to change channel, and that's really fast. And that means that I can tap something out without needing a MIDI keyboard. Of course, it will be more expressive and much more natural using a real keyboard. But if you're in a pinch, it's nice to have this. Now, the next thing to know about MIDI is this MIDI piece here. If I double click on this, I get treated to the MIDI editor. Now, in the MIDI editor, I can see each and every note, and I can zoom in and out with plus and minus. And I can see how long they are. I can see how loud they are, not only based on the colour of each note, but you'll see a little white line. And you see this particular note that I dragged, as I make it quieter, the number gets smaller, it goes greener, and also the bar gets smaller. So there are 3 visual ways to see whether a note's going to be loud or not. I can double click anywhere to add another note. I can drag the very starts and ends of notes. You'll see that the mouse changes to make them longer, shorter. I can just pick up a note and move it around to the right place. If it was the wrong note, I can move it to the right note. There is so much that I can do. I'm not going to go into, again, huge detail because there are things like quantization that you can do if you want to. But now I've shown you the power of you don't need to be a master piano player, or even if you are and you make one mistake, you don't have to do the take all over again. You can go back and correct that one mistake by either deleting a note, changing it to the correct pitch, whatever it is that you decided to do. You can even drag, if you right click a box around these, you can drag multiple notes, and you could do, I don't know, you could change the octave of them, you could completely change the key. Whatever it is that you want to do, it's all here. One thing that's worth noting is that all of these notes will snap to the grid. As I move them, you can actually see the starts and ends moving to the nearest 32nd note, because at the bottom, that's what the grid is set to, is 1/32, and I can change that maybe to an 1/8 if I'm going to be making really like robotic house music or something, whatever it is that I'm doing. And there's a little magnet up top, which if I tick that, all bets are off and the snap is gone, which means that if I want a note to come in at exactly a certain time or finish at an exact certain time, grid aside, I can just turn that off. Now, that brings me on to the next thing, which is the grid on the rest of this. So, as it stands, that snap has been on all the time here. So if I was to grab the very left-hand side of an audio clip, that would then, if I drag that along, allow me to cut the start of that off. But as you can see, it's going dip, 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 and it's catching on the start of every bar, which, if I've got everything working to a click, might be great. But if I want to do something very particular, and let's just zoom in here, if I want to do something very particular, it won't let me. It will only let me go between the bars. So what I have to do is on the top left, there's snap enabled. I have to click that. That's now disabled. And that means that this same piece of audio is now allowing me to do very, very fine control. So let's say that I stop this at the start of this beat. This should now, without the intro, let's just turn off that MIDI track. I've just managed to edit off the entire intro of that song just by making sure that it starts exactly just before the start of that poof. Now let's bring that back and have a little bit more intro. What if I wanted to fade that in? That's also easy. Where I'm dragging at the side of this file, if I go to the top of it, the mouse changes to this little curve. If I drag the mouse inwards from there, you'll see that that's now making a big curve. And what that's going to do, if I hit play from before it, is that's bringing the volume in gradually. Now, where that white line is, that's where you can go back to move that. If I right click on that, I get a choice of different fades. So there's kind of the quick one, there's a slow one, there's one that's a straight line. Especially in a mastering context, I find that these can really help you out to make it not as obvious that you're doing kind of, here's a fade, so you can be much more subtle. And the last thing for the basics tutorial is, let's say that I wanted a section of this, but I didn't want the rest of it. I could then go in and find the exact point that I wanted to cut up this file and hit the S key, S for split. And that splits it right there into two pieces. So I can now, if I zoom out, grab one piece and move it around, not affect the other. If I undo that, I could then grab the other, delete it. And I find that saves me a lot of time rather than having to go right the way to the end of a file or the end of a clip. I can then just go split here, get rid of that, thank you, done. So that's saving me a lot of time. So hopefully you've enjoyed the basics of this. I'm going to go back to me in the studio and hope you're looking forward to the next part. So thanks for watching. There will be more parts of this tutorial probably out now in the description, if not coming out very soon. In the short term, I'm going to link below to the older Reaper tutorials because there's stuff about routing audio, how to export files in certain formats, clever tricks and tips that can save you loads of time, how to work with virtual drums and make sure you get separate drums on separate channels, all that kind of stuff that can be really quite important to somebody who's just starting out in audio production and wants to get a grip on things fast. So they may already be the updated versions, if not the older versions are still there, so all the information is still relevant. Hope that you've really enjoyed this. If you have, click the like button because that really helps the channel out. Subscribe for more of this kind of content and gear reviews. We do guitar amps, guitars, microphones, headphones, interfaces, all sorts of stuff. So stick around, check that out, and thank you everybody one more time. And if you really, really, really liked it, subscribe to us on Patreon, where you can help us out and really help to keep the lights on and keep this whole world turning round. We are ever grateful for your views and support, so thank you everybody. I'm Adam Steele for Hot Pole Studios, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. See you later. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.